you know what cheese curds, motorcycles, and surf rods have in common? Turns out the best of all come from Wisconsin.
That's right. We're talking the 77-year-old, family-owned American company, St. Croix Rod, where the surf is no part-time business. Offering 41 models across 5 distinct surf series, St. Croix has been designing and handcrafting high-performance, tech-forward surf rods for decades.
Simply put, St. Croix combines the best technology and components with the lengths, powers, and actions demanded by discerning anglers up and down the Striper Coast. All this to say that St. Croix is the premier choice for anglers who demand the best rods on earth. Check out the full lineup at stcroixrods.com.
Beginning in the 1970s as a mail-order catalog, the Surfcaster has long been known as the source for hard-to-find surf fishing gear, and I've been personally shopping with them since the 1980s. They offer honest advice and the best recommendations regardless of your experience level, and will tailor their suggestions to what you actually need.
As you would expect from a business that's been serving the surfcasting community for 50 years, their prices are competitive and delivery is always quick and secure. They want you to have the best possible experience in the surf and have the knowledge and inventory to put the right gear in your hands to make that happen. So check out the Surfcaster at www.thesurfcaster.com, and if you're in the area, stop into their brand new brick and mortar store in Shelton, Connecticut. Welcome back to the Surfcast Podcast. A couple of episodes, I promoted a little bit my book, and what's really funny is I did not even say the title of the book coming out. So the book is Hooked: Legendary Freshwater and Saltwater Fish to Catch in a Lifetime, and it is going to be available everywhere the day after this episode comes out, I believe, April 15th, so check that out. Today, we have John Skinner on the podcast. If you don't know John, then you probably don't know surfcasting. This is probably your first thing you've ever looked at with surfcasting, which actually would be kind of fantastic and great. But we want to encourage everyone to check out John's books, of which there are 5. And John, what's the latest one that you want everyone to make sure they got?
Fishing the Edge, and that's a multi-species book. It covers all of the inshore stuff that we've got up in the Northeast. Of course, striped bass and fluke, but also weak fish, sea bass, all the stuff that's, I think there's like 12 species in there.
Yeah. Fantastic tarpon section as well. So, yeah. Love it. So, check out the books. But before we get into tonight's subject, which is going to be talking about eels, something we've been requested a whole bunch of times, but we're going to break open sort of tonight. I want to point out that we are starting what hopefully will be a tradition. And this is coming out the day before what was traditionally the opening season in New York. And so we're hoping to have John back as sort of a tradition. And that's why you're getting this episode in the middle of the month and not at the end of the month, how we normally do this. So thanks, John, for coming here. We asked Nick this the last interview, and we wanted to do it with all of our guests, and we totally forgot. But we just want to ask you really quick and get us started. How was your season last year?
It was terrible. Now, I put a lot of effort on the North Fork of Long Island because that's where I live, and traditionally those are great waters. And I've just watched like the last couple of years just get worse and worse to the point that, man, it's hard to raise anything. And it got so bad that I actually fished starting in, I don't know, about late October, start fishing the South Shore. Now, for me to hop in my truck and drive 40-something minutes to go over to West Hampton, and, I have no four-wheel drive access there, and I got to walk the sand like anybody else, well, except for Cupsog. But, for me to go make that effort, and leave it's not just the effort, because I did that for many years when I lived in Wading River. It's the effort's not, 40-something minutes, not a huge big deal. But for me to leave the North Fork and do that's the hard part, because usually there's so much stuff going on. But we had no false albacore, 0, none, which is extremely unusual. And we haven't had adult bunker in at least 3 seasons now. I've seen adult bunker probably twice in the last 3 seasons. And prior to that, wow, the water would boil with them at times. And those were often the times when we had some quality bass. You didn't get a lot of them, but you got some. and sometimes you get a couple of them, and you got some big ones in the 30s. And I'm talking about daylight, or at least dawn and dusk pencils, and then after dark with eels, and no, and it gets to the point, when do you pull a sheet over it, and you can't, right? You got to keep it honest, especially if you live on it.
Yeah, if it's your backyard, you got to keep give it a shot. Now you said no bunker, which same in a lot of places the last couple of years for sure. Did you run into, even without fish on them at times, other bait species at all that were prevalent that you would have run into in past seasons, or was it kind of devoid in general of bait?
That's so late in the year. In November, we had a lot of the bay anchovies, and here's what was crazy was, in at the time when it should have been boiling with smaller bass, at least slots and schoolies and stuff. The water was brown with that bait, that reddish brown color it gets with the bay anchovies. And the crazy thing was, the only thing on them were mackerel. And I haven't seen mackerel in the Sound in 30 years or something. And you'd be on, you would see the birds going nuts and go, oh my God, here's the mother lode, Yeah. And you go down there, and the only thing that was happening was occasionally you'd see all these little torpedoes, and they were mackerel. And here's the thing, there was nothing on the mackerel, and there should have been big blues. I mean, we're talking, I think we're around November 12th, somewhere in there.
Wow.
I mean, plenty of time, and no bass, no blues on incredible amounts of bait, and high quality mackerel bait, and nothing on them. It was just crazy.
Now those Atlantic mackerel you're saying, not the chubs that you were seeing, right?
They look like Tinkers or Bostons or something like that. Yeah.
We had them in early mid-November when I was squid fishing in Rhode Island. After a day of black fishing, we had the same. We had mackerel, Atlantic mackerel, running through our lights at night. We got a couple on the squid jigs, so it was in that same time frame. They were from Rhode Island into the Sound, so it's good to see, I guess. But it'd be nice if something was on them.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned bluefish. Is that traditionally more of a bluefish bite when you get those mackerel like that, like way back in the day?
No, we never had mackerel. I mean, way back in the day, we had mackerel in April. We would get the Boston mackerel come into Sound. People would fill garbage cans full of them for shark bait, and that went away many years ago. And since then, there's been no mackerel. Now suddenly there's some. I have never ever seen them in the fall. Not this was the first time I had ever seen that. But it didn't matter. There were no fish. Yeah.
Wow. So you've already mentioned a couple already, standout things, but was there something that happened last year, a bite or a tide or something that really stands out in your mind? I mean, obviously mackerel in November, you may have already said it, but is there something else that you sort of think about?
I mean, there was like one, I mean, we're known for blitzes in the fall, there was like one good day that, where those things went pretty much all day long, and that was it. I think it was November 8th. Yeah, that was it.
November 8th.
So I ended up doing a fair amount of fishing on the South Shore in West Hampton, which was actually quite enjoyable to be doing that. But yeah, I had to drive.
Not the same.
Yeah, those South Shore fish. Were you fishing on a pattern, on a bait, or like on a migration?
Oh, it was a sand eel run.
Okay,
it was a sand eel run.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. When you're doing that, what's the first plug out of your bag?
No plug. Bucktails, tsunami weighted sand eels, and oh God, I hate to ever throw them, but if you can't reach them with anything else, you know what I'm going to say, right?
With a green tube?
Yeah.
Tin with a green tube. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you can't reach them and you got huge mountains of water coming in, which is the sand eels love that, the sand eel bites rather love that kind of water. And but yeah, I didn't have to use that too much. Most of the time I got them with bucktails, even in really rough water. But yeah.
Interesting. So, I mean, obviously this is a transient bite. You haven't done it for a while. Were you looking for any kind of specific structure when it came to this type of thing, or were you sort of just walking and reading the beach as you're known for and famous for?
Well, what the cool thing about sand eel bites is I don't consider them transient in that when you get a sand eel bite, that usually goes for at least 3 weeks, actually more. So it's great, and they tend to really latch on to some areas of structure. And what was funny was that like the one beach I drove on years ago, Fire Island National Seashore, I had all these mileage things in my head. Oh, 1.1 miles, 2.6, 3.1, and some of those spots were still, yeah, that's where they were. For whatever reason, you get the right kind of beach structure. And yeah, so you're looking at points, some areas that are a little bit deeper, the usual stuff, white water edges and all of that. But typically some areas where you can get a little bit of deeper water closer to shore, and they seem to dig in there. But the rough days were really the days to do it.
Interesting. Yeah, when I said transient, I meant more like the structure is constantly changing. So it's not like you're like, oh, I'm going down to this boulder field or whatever. But then you just completely refuted even that idea by listing off those miles, which is really interesting. You think that has something to do with the nearshore waters or just the structure of like the dune behind what? Because I noticed the same thing on some of my beaches. Why do you think that is?
Boy, I haven't given too much thought to it. It now some places were drastically changed, like the West Hampton area around Cupsog, because they had done beach replenishment many years ago, but it took time for that sand to move. I mean, they pumped sand after whatever storm that was that washed that place out. They pumped a lot of sand, and it's moved. So Cupsog was completely different. But yeah, after you go there you spend a day or two, you kind of figure it out, and you know where to go the next time you go. So that was kind of fun to get back into doing that. I would prefer to limit myself to within 7 miles of my house, well, like I normally do. But yeah,
I sometimes don't
do
limit
that.
myself to 7 miles from my car.
Just to get to the highways area, I think I might be more for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely am. That's funny. So, all right, well, thanks, John. That's great. That's a great little recap of last season and stuff. So let's get on to the topic at hand, and I'm going to get it started because years ago, I don't know how long ago it was. I think it was more than a decade. I came up to you at a show, and I was trying to remember which one, and I can't, because every show that I went to for a while, I would always hunt you out and try to talk to you. And I came up to you, and we talked for a while, and I went away, and we were about to leave, and I said to my wife, who was with me, it's the only show she's ever gone with me, and I said, I got to go back, I got to ask him one more question. So I came back, and I asked you, I said, if you had to give one single biggest piece of advice to someone who wants to catch more larger fish, what would it be? And you said, fish at night. And I said, oh, I already fish at night. And you thought I said I never fish at night. And you were like, you kind of stuttered because you were like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? He's not fishing at night. But you were like, fish pencils. And I said, oh, no, I only fish at night. And you went, oh, well, then it's easy. Fish eels. Just like that. It was right off the tip of your tongue. I mean, it was right there. And so I'm wondering, quite simply, does that advice still stand? And why did you say that?
Oh no, it absolutely still stands. I mean, oh my goodness, for years, myself and like one or two other guys, we caught ridiculous fish in a place where if I had told people where we caught those fish, nobody would ever believe it. Nobody would believe we were catching those fish there. They catch fish that, look, you got to realize those big bass, there's always food for them. There's if you go snorkeling in Long Island Sound, in probably one breath, you're going to go down and you're going to see crabs, sea robins, sea bass, burgalls, porgies. There's so much food for them in these areas, and they have these areas where they stage, and food is kind of readily available to them. And yeah, I mean, they're not necessarily going to, or most unlikely to hit a plug, especially the big ones. Those, 30-pound plus fish. How often does, at least in the areas I'm thinking of Long Island Sound, and I'm talking well west of where I live now, how often did anybody ever get a 30-pounder out of there on a bomber or a redfin or all the things that were thrown at night? And then, oh my goodness, you throw an eel out there and all of a sudden, holy crap, there's fish there you never would have imagined. were there. Never would have dreamed. I'm talking, fish well into the 40s. I know a couple 50s, in places that no, this is, yeah, yeah.
So that
So,
advice is just as sound now as
oh,
it was then.
oh yeah. In fact, I happen to know those fish are still there, and yeah, I leave them. I'm not driving back west for them, but I know they're there. Yeah.
Might even be more so true now with what you're saying, like how your last season went in that area too. I mean, if it's that much tougher, it makes that much more sense to go with something that
Oh
gives
well,
you that.
I can tell you those fish are not on at least where I fish on the North Fork of Long Island, where I normally do well. They're not there. They're
Mm,
just not there because I did throw eels.
yeah.
If you throw eels and what's crazy is you get you probably get a brown shark before you're gonna get a
Uh-huh.
big bass. Yeah.
I bet if you added it up, more striped bass were caught from the surf last year on plastic swimmers than any other plug, probably even more than bucktails. The reason is simple. For generations, the plastic swimmer has proven to be a versatile, effective, and affordable fish catching machine.
And that's where the new Hogy OG Swimmer comes in. Unlike most of the other modern swimmers that all look and act alike, the OG Swimmer brings together a traditional design with modern enhancements to offer anglers with a unique and highly effective swimming plug unlike anything else currently on the market. With a unique wobbling action, it moves like an injured baitfish, and it's a large profile, chunky and tubular, and measuring in at 7 inches. Plus, with a downturn line tie, the OG Swimmer stays shallow, making it ideal for surf anglers.
All of this is tied together in an extra hard body that's through wired and decked out with VMC hooks and a hand-tied bucktail teaser. And just like the Hogy needlefish, you won't find a rear hook on this lure, which is better for the fish, better for your hands, and easier on your wallet. This is all part of the Hook One platform, as well as Hogy's new core philosophy, quality for today, conservation for tomorrow. To find out more about this mission, and to pick up one of these premium OG swimmers, be sure to check out www.hogylures.com. All right, before we get too deep into eel theory, ideas, how you're going to be a better surfcaster, let's get out some of the basics of getting started. And first of all, you got to buy some eels. Once you do that, John, what are you doing with them at home? How are you keeping these things alive? How are you setting it up? And why do you have that set up?
Well, yeah, if you're going to be serious about eel fishing, you really need to have a home well set up, and it's not so complicated. I had this 30-gallon. It was actually made for a live well in a boat, just a round thing, and plain old garden hose water is fine. Although you should treat the water. There's something called better bait, just powder that you throw in there, and it takes care of whatever chlorine or whatever is in the water. And just like a couple of, I had two fish tank pumps, just that would normally run like a 30-gallon fish tank or something, nothing elaborate. So two fish tank pumps, a 30-gallon thing, garden hose water. What was nice about this live well is it had a little spigot on the bottom. I could open it up and drain it out of hose. I kept it in my garage. And that garage would get hot. There was no need to try and cool the eels. They could handle the temperature. You definitely don't want to feed the eels. This would be crazy because you destroy the water quality. So it is really simple. And what I would do is in fact, in the 30-gallon container, I actually had a 5-gallon black bucket with holes drilled in it and a cover. And all the eels actually went in the 5-gallon thing. Even if I had, 40 eels in there, they would all be in the black bucket that was then inside the 30-gallon container. So that made it, way easy when I want to grab some eels. I pull out the black bucket and grab what I want. And one of the reasons you want to do this is because when you buy eels, I mean, I had a good advantage when I was back in Wading River. I would go to this commercial guy and he would grade them for me. So I would get pretty uniform eels. And, to some extent, I can still do that now, but probably not in such large quantities as I used to be able to do it. Because, look, some eels work better. For example, inlet eels. If I'm casting into an inlet, I want big, nasty eels, like 18, 19 inches, because they're really powerful and they're strong. They can swim to the bottom where it's a little deeper and there's more current. So I would save my biggest eels for the inlet. On Long Island Sound, well, you know what? I would throw eels on a 9-footer if they were, 14, 15 inches. That's plenty. and then some other places, the 16s and 17s, I'd use them. So I would be matching the eels to the places that I fish, and having that live well at home, besides saving money, you could buy in bulk somewhat, and you always have them there. And, you come home, you put them back in, and, you're good. You're not wasting anything.
Now, you mentioned inside the tank, the black bucket.
Yeah.
That was a definite, like, you want it, because I've had this discussion with people a bunch of times. Painting your container black, your storage bin, doesn't matter. So you like the container to be black. Why is that?
Oh, the eels stay black. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and so you're going to get, it's like using black bucktails or wine red bucktails at night, contrast, a better silhouette. Absolutely. Does it make a difference? Doesn't hurt.
Yeah. All right.
How many would you keep at a time? Like
Ooh.
would you keep 50 and then let it whittle down to 20 and then bring it back up? Like,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, as long as I had enough for a trip or two, if it went down to a dozen, that's all right. But, I kept pretty well stocked. I mean, these days I don't fish live eels the problem is now I fish a lot for content, right? I've got this business that
media empire.
Fishing. Yes, yeah. What did Howard Stern call himself? The king of all media.
Yeah, you're the king of all fishing media. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So anyway, so the nighttime video is hard to acquire in any kind of good quality. But that doesn't mean I don't do that kind of fishing. But now what I do is I go up to my local tackle shop, and I've been fortunate enough to always have good relationships with tackle shops, and I can go up there and handpick some eels. So I know they're there. They're a couple miles away from my house. I don't need to keep my own well anymore. But yeah, when I was doing it real seriously, and I mean, a lot. Yeah, 20 to 50 eels in the garage all the time. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So moving from home to the water, what is your preferred way to carry them? And I've heard guys use mesh bags. I'm a jug guy. Some guys like a soft-sided cooler. Some guys have a 5-gallon bucket that they tote up on the beach. What's your choice? And did it change based on how or where you were fishing, or was it kind of universally the same thing?
All right. In the truck, it's, just I've got a bucket in a bucket, right? You've got a bucket with holes drilled in it, so it drains out into the other bucket. You don't want them, collecting in slime and suffocating, and you don't want that stuff going all over your truck. So it's a bucket in a bucket, just transporting to the fishing spot. And then from there on, it's mesh bags. And I did used to go with that little like cooler kind of container with holes drilled in it. And I see no, I think the mesh is fine, but you just got to be careful if it's a windy night and they're exposed. That can be a problem. That they dry out, they die.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing. You got to make sure you dunk them. At least, of course, when you're fishing, it's not a problem. But if long walk and it's windy, that you just have to dunk them once in a while. That can be a problem.
All right. Would you ice them when you were driving too? Like you said, you had the bucket in the truck. Were you keeping them colder, or at that point you didn't really care?
No, the only time I iced eels was so when I worked on the day job, it was advantageous for me to get eels at lunchtime. So I'd go see the commercial guy at lunch, and I had an office and an office building, and I would keep eels in my office and under my desk where nobody saw them, and that's so now they're out of the water for some period of time. And yes, I would put ice on those. But I've never, except driving to Montauk where it was like an hour and 20 minutes. I don't have long drives to go fishing. But that was an issue. If I got eels at lunch, now they're going to be in the office for 4 hours. They're not going to get into the well for 5 hours. I'm icing them. Yeah.
All right. Last up, before we get back into some little more in-depth talk, hook choice. What are you running with when you were using before it was required to go to circles? What'd you use, and what are you using since the conversion or the requirement now for circles?
7.0 Gamakatsu octopus hook was, that's the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a 7.0 Gamakatsu circle octopus. Yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah. All right.
Nice.
And so. The circle hooks, work wonderfully on some things, like down here in Florida. Boy, I don't think I've ever seen a grouper gut hooked. We're using circle hooks, right? Striped bass and eels, oh yeah, those get gut hooked with a circle hook. Absolutely, it happens. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. Certainly not 100%.
You know what? Because you set up faster on them with a J hook.
Yeah.
You get the hit, boom, set. Now it's like so yeah. I think
Interesting. Do you snell your hooks? How do you set that up?
Well, I'm snelling those particular hooks. So
That's
here's
what I
my rule. Here's the rule: is if it's got a bent hook eye, that's a snell. If it's not a bent hook eye, it's a clinch knot. I think that's the way those things are made to be. They're the ones with the bent eyes are not meant to have just a knot tied on the end because then the angle is wrong. It's meant to have a snell. And, if it's just a straight eye, well, I guess it doesn't matter. You're still going to have a direct pull, but there's no gain in snelling. You might as well just tie a clinch knot on it.
Interesting. Yeah. We do much better with chunking with the power snell, even with the straight eyes. It definitely seems to make a big difference. And I've seen my friend Brett have a marked increase in his hookups. I think you should consider it. It's interesting. Maybe we'll talk about it off the podcast. But
you chunk?
Oh yes, yeah. Well, that's Toby's. This is Toby's fault because Toby showed me a way of chunking that's incredible. Where you
do that after you run out of clam bellies or something? Or how does that work?
Now, see, this is great because that's exactly how I felt about chunking until Toby showed me this magical way of going and cast netting your own bait. You're taking the bait locally. It's damn fresh. Then you're just taking that bait. You're taking it right to the fish and you're chopping them up. And it's a totally different experience. I really enjoyed.
It's a fly guy who chunks.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
You got to tie him up a chunk fly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, John, I'm really interested, and I think I've heard you say this before, but it's been a long time, and I was trying to remember. I've heard so many theories about why bass love eels or hate them or whatever the reason is, why they'll preferentially go for them, even when they've got a giant bluefish in their mouth, which is a famous story that I've heard you talk about. But what do you think it is? Why do you think that they quote unquote love the eel or hate it or whatever?
So I don't know and I don't care. I mean, really, that's my answer to things. I mean, I just have to know something. I don't necessarily have to know why. And I can tell you, bass will hit eels when they're neutral or they're not hungry. I mean, that bass with the bluefish in his gullet, there's no way that bass could eat anything. It wasn't just, I mean, that bluefish was at least 2.5 pounds. And it was like a 28-pound fish. And he hit the eel. What was it thinking? It couldn't eat it. It could not have been hungry. So that just, that really solidified something for me,
Yeah.
Have you ever found an eel in a striper's belly, like a striper that you harvested and, filleted and cleaned it? Did you ever find an eel in the stomach? Like, that's something that I don't think I've ever come out. Like most guys that I've asked that I haven't had it happen, but we know they attack the eels, obviously, because we catch them on them so often.
Yeah, I don't know. I kept so few, even when I could keep them. I didn't keep a lot. And normally when I did, I would always open up the stomachs, and you always got crabs and sea robins and, flounder, stuff like that. It's all that stuff that you see when you go snorkeling.
Yeah.
But when I snorkel, you don't see the eels. And if they were there, they would be really, really hard to get. So that's why I think people wouldn't find them in bass because, boy, those things are in holes that there's no way the bass can get at, especially a big bass with a big head. They're not going to be able to get that, but they can grab crabs and all that other stuff.
Yeah. Interesting. Before I forget, this goes back to something that this is probably how this interview is going to go because it's all over the place and I have a bunch of different questions, but something you said earlier where you were grading your eels and you were like, this size for this size for that, blah, blah. If you had to pick an ideal eel for most conditions, what do you want? Like size-wise? Like what's the best all-around eel? Or does it exist?
Yeah, it's like 16 inches.
Okay.
Yeah. 16, you can cast it. and you can cast it on a variety of tackle. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Is there any use for shoestrings? Just curious.
How define shoestring?
I don't know, something 8-10 inches.
Oh goodness, no. I don't know. I put it this way, I'm sure there is, but I'm not throwing that. I mean, I'm trying to catch big stuff. I'm not gonna. I mean, boy, that would have to be the rod would have to be, throw it on a 7-footer. I'm sure if you had some, 8-inch eels and, you threw them on a 7-footer somewhere, that, that would work. But yeah.
So when you're eeling, are you? I mean, this may be a loaded question because I think maybe you're thinking this all the time. But when you're throwing eels, are you always thinking trophy? Are you always thinking 50?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, not necessarily 50. So what I'll tell you, when I was doing it a lot, I was doing it, you always want that big one, but my reasoning was to plow through a lot of fish over 36 inches. So that was what I would keep count of during a season, because my reasoning was if you catch a lot of fish over 36 inches, maybe 2% or so, maybe 4%, 2 to 4%, at least, for a bunch of years, over a 20-year period there, I was really doing it a lot. They're going to go over 40 pounds, so that was the objective.
Interesting.
Is that make sure you catch at least 100 fish in a season that are over 36 inches, and you're going to get 440s. You're going to get at least 240s. You're probably going to get 4, so, and maybe you get a 50. All right. So that was look, I'm a numbers guy, right? So this is what you do, right?
Yes. So that is a statistic that you've come up with based on your own data.
Well, for the places I fish, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard you say that before. That's really interesting. I'd have to do the math
I don't
on
think
me.
I've ever said it. Yeah, it was funny in work, man. I used to have, well, one of those things that you write on. You got this big thing and you scribble things on it. Anyway, I always had all these numbers of how many, all these seasons of how many, what the bottom line was, how many were over, and then how many were,
That's amazing.
40s.
Yeah, it's funny you say that with like the numbers. I think the same way with if you can get this number of this, your odds should equate to at least this minimum. And like thinking my logbook, that's how it's built, is so that I can pull that out of it.
Yeah. Sorry, Toby. I asked a lot of questions. I'm sure you have.
Oh, no, that's fine. So let's see where we get. So is your gear? Let's go to some more gear stuff then. If you're eeling versus plugging, is it basically the same setup, but you just, the night that you're eeling, you grab the eels versus the plugs, or is it specialized gear that you're fishing, especially so because you're thinking those larger fish with the eels? So is there a difference there for you?
There's not much difference. When I first, this was going way back. I really wanted like a 9-footer ish for Long Island Sound, and couldn't find it, and that's when I got into getting the 10-foot Lamiglass, cutting it down to 9, and you put a VS 200 on that with 50-pound leader, you're set to go on big fish. But that whole outfit is a great outfit to just fish with, bucktails and plugs. So that outfit was it, that. And then eventually that became a 9.2 because I realized that the 9-footer was so valuable to me. And some night I'm going to break it. And oh my God, what am I going to do? So I made sure I had another, because I built them. So I had another blank ready to go. And I never broke the rod. And the blank just sat there. I said, well, this is a waste. So let me make a 9.5 out of it. And I didn't care for the 9.5. I said, well, let me take a little more off. And when I got to 9.2, that was it. That was so perfect. I never used the 9 again. And everything was on the 9.2. And that was just, and I use that on the South Shore sand. Now, of course, on the jetties and stuff or some bigger water, I use an 11-footer, but that 9.2, wow, it was a tremendous workhorse.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, was that like your primarily open beach, North Shore, South Shore, but then, because I was envisioning that rod in the inlets having a tough go.
No. That's where the 11, and the older GSB 132. The older 1990 version, that's a much different blank than today.
Yeah, definitely is. Are you generally, so we've been talking a lot about the North Shore. Are you generally throwing eels when it's calm? And if the answer is yes or no, I guess it doesn't really matter. Is there a place for them when it's really rough and like stormy?
Okay. On the Long Island Sound beaches, um, I'm trying to answer this without blowing anything
Yeah,
here.
sure.
Yeah,
I was listening very attentively there for a second. See what he's.
yeah. No, it's calm. It's calm, and now it's calm. We'll leave it at that for
Okay.
a number of reasons. It's
hmm
calm. Now some of my best fishing was on the roughest, most horrendous nights, very rough water. Um, and eels, these were devastating nights. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Did you want to throw
I
any?
mean, one no, go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I mean, I can think of one night, where I think it was 11 casts in a row. I had a fish like 20 to 35 pounds. Just in the roughest, nastiest crap. But it was a situation where you could throw an eel into that. Let's say. Yeah.
hmm
Do you throw the big boy eels? I'm hung up on the eel size for some reason. Would you have pulled the bigger eels out for those situations or
No,
no?
no,
No.
because it wasn't needed. Yeah.
So,
I mean,
um,
look, but they would have to be 16s,
right.
17s in that setting. But they didn't need. I mean, I sometimes would throw 19, 20, in the inlets. Like I said, I saved them. Those were the inlet eels. In fact, the way I discovered the big bass on the Sound, and you're going to have to cut this out if it's like politically incorrect or something. So you'll just have to cut it out. But so what would happen was I'd have all these eels, right? And I'm always taking the ones I need for something. What was happening was sometimes when they got graded, some smaller ones would slip through. So now I've got all these like 14-inch, 13, 14-inch eels that I don't know what am I going to do with them. I can't use them in the places I need them. And so I called those the Passover eels because I passed over them to get to the other eels. So one night I decided to take the Passover eels to where I plug stripers on the North Shore. And oh my God, it was just unfreaking believable. What was there that I didn't know was there, and that opened up a whole thing for me. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And throwing 14-inch eels on my and at that see that's I was throwing them on my 9-foot plug rod, my redfin rod. Back then you'd throw redfins, bombers, and I brought my little eels, and wow, and but so then I had to start upgrading, go to try to get that perfect 9-foot rod, bump it up to 30 instead of 20, so I bumped it up a little bit in that respect because at the time I was throwing bomber 16s, so 6-inch bombers and
Yeah. 16A.
stuff like that. So
Yeah.
hopefully nobody's offended by the passing.
I don't think so. We're definitely leaving that
I,
in. We're definitely leaving that in for sure. So you
yeah.
bring up an interesting thing. You've brought up a few times here. Are all plugging spots eel spots and vice versa? Like, can you
Are there
plug?
fish? Are there any place with this big bass is an eel spot? It's so simple.
Yeah. Okay. Have you
Yeah.
is there a
It's like
spot?
saying, is there any place where Skinner won't eat a slice of pizza? No, no. Skinner's there. The pizza gets eaten. It doesn't matter where it is. Yeah. So there. That's how I think about it.
That sounds like Jerry too. Is there a scenario then in which an eel is not the right answer? Besides like a daytime blitz or something like that. Unless that's a time for eel too. I'd love to hear it. But is there, you're like, yeah, this is really not really a time for an eel.
I can't think of any. Yeah, I mean, but you have to realize, like, look, there are scenarios that I haven't gotten to fish a whole heck of a lot. Like I know, like, or at least I hear about, like up in Raritan Bay in the spring, they'll have, loads of bunker and they'll throw metal lips and stuff, and that all makes perfect sense to me. But I don't usually fish in a situation where there's tremendous, amounts of bunker and everything, and so there may be settings, but for me, it's always worked. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of brings up a point, and maybe this is just reiterating what you just said, but are eels, a lot of times where I know of like my friends fishing eels and where I hear about it a lot, you're generally fishing over fishy areas, current or structure or whatever. Is there a time for eel when they're on a specific bait? Like if you stumbled into or planned on going into a sand eel bite, for example, would you throw an eel? I mean, you just said when there's like tons and tons of bunkers, sometimes it may not make sense. Still throw an eel? What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Especially at night, 100%. And what's interesting is a friend of mine follows those bunker schools around and you can't do snag and drop anymore, but I mean this is what for years these guys did, snag and drop, and occasionally they keep a fish, and you wouldn't believe how many times he'd open up a bass that was on those bunker schools, and they've got skates in them, and they've got multiple skates in them. They're on those bunker schools, but they won't pass up a skate. So that gives you an idea of how, yeah, you give them a good meal.
Taking it, yeah.
Yeah. How about no, go ahead, Toby. I've been asking a lot.
Oh, no, I was just gonna. You said obviously when you're fishing the outflows, the you wanted the biggest eel to really dig down. Do you always want like the liveliest? Do you find you have better success on the liveliest eels? Do you slow them? Are there situations where you slow them down? Like, some guys say you whack them on the side of the bucket or your rod or a rock or whatever you can. Or are you you wanted that thing kicking as hard as it could go?
No, there's definitely times you've got to slow them down, because if you know what, and immediately the south side of Montauk comes to mind. Like you throw out there and they dig down into the junk. And so, boy, hopefully if you got a nice perch that you can, get down and whack those things. If you're standing in deeper water a little bit, you can't, I got nothing to whack it on. But if you're throwing into shallow, rocky, I mean, I'm always fishing rocky stuff on the Sound, but if it's shallow and there's a lot of weeds, definitely like south side of Montauk is like that. Yeah, you benefit from whacking them, else they're going to dig into the junk and get all hung up and tied in a knot and yuck. Yeah.
Now, would you ever opt for starting not a rigged, but just a dead eel in that kind of situation? Or you're always going to at least want a little bit of life in them?
I'm sure everybody does this. You squeeze them, and if the tail curls, it's still good, right?
Okay.
But there's also a use it until you lose it mentality also. How many times we got 6 7 fish on an eel, right? Just keep hooking it all different. How you stick that hook in so many different ways is like nothing left of the head until you lose the eel. And if there's a good bite on, that's going to work out just absolutely fine.
Yeah. So more when there's a bite, you're willing to go that. I'm thinking there were spots, like you're saying, wanting to fish a slowed down, more subdued eel when it's real sticky. A lot of those places I would fish, or I do fish, excuse me, I'd even start out with a dead, like a frozen dead eel that I'd fished live and lively, and then it died, and I threw it back in the jug at the end of the night. So would you ever go that route, actually bring a dead to start, or fish it to dead?
I've never brought dead eels to start. I've never started with a dead eel unless it was, the eel that I can't talk about.
Yeah. The no longer allowed, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Here's a question. Are you generally... So a lot of my fishing is done on some version of a swing. So my plug is moving in a direction other than directly out and directly back. But I know of a lot of guys who eel who are throwing it directly out and reeling it directly back. Are you generally throw it out, reel it back slow? Are you swinging it in some current? Are you using some kind of tidal movement? Like, what's the deal there?
It depends on the spot. I mean, I've got spots where there's so little current, you're throwing it out and you're reeling it in, and it's not moving much either way. And the amazing thing is the best fish often come right when there's almost no water movement. It's incredible. But I've also fished places where it's like, you'd be using a darter, and in that case, I might just throw it out to the, up current and just let it swing. And, even in some places, then feed line on the downswing, feed line. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
You mentioned it triggered a thought there, referencing the darter and the eel. If you were eeling on a night, were you just packing eels, or would you pack plugs and eels?
No, I would also pack plugs. The reason I'm laughing is because sometimes bluefish would show up, and then um, they would still the bluefish will hit the plugs, right? So then you got to put the plug on and try and catch the bluefish to get the damn thing out of there. Or what often would work if the blue if you it wouldn't be a lot of bluefish. If there were a lot of bluefish, obviously you were messed up. But it could be just one bluefish hanging out in your rip, right? So you got to go catch that thing. So I'd go throw a plug on. A lot of times they'd whack that, and then I would be okay. Other times I would just wait out, just stop fishing for 10 minutes, see if the bluefish might move on, So there were plugs in the bag for that. There were plugs in the bag because maybe the eeling conditions weren't perfect for me to reach them or something. If the wind didn't turn out to be the way I needed it to be, and so that as a last resort, I'd go to plugs. But pretty much, if I'm going out with eels, I'm fishing eels.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, it was something I would battle with. That's why I always wonder if I know guys that would pack a full plug bag, a dozen eels. They'd go between them and have no problems. For me, if I'm throwing one, I think I should be throwing the other, and vice versa. So I had to just all in one or the other. So it's always interesting to hear how guys work through that, both mentally and then physically. So that makes sense with the bluefish. So.
Yeah. Interesting. My buddy who eels, he always brings a plug bag, and he literally never throws a plug ever. To the point where he had a Danny in his side pocket of his bag that was jammed in and all wrapped up in the hooks, and he couldn't get it out anyways. He carried it every night anyways. And he never. But
good luck, Charlie.
I had bombers like that. Look on Long Island Sound. I mean, come on. I had bombers that were just, they were never gonna.
They're like emotional support plugs.
Yeah,
it's like they're
so
just.
What if? Yeah, what if I go down there and they're like busting? They were never busting, and that's a crazy. That's another thing. These places where we caught and where they still are, lots of big fish. You never heard a thing ever, ever, ever. Never a splash, never a pop, nothing. Dead water.
Is there? You mentioned current. So is there too much current? Is there such a thing as too much current? I mean, maybe outside of Morches on a full moon or something, but maybe not. Is there, you're like, this is too much for the eel.
All right. So look, the strike zone is, a couple feet off the bottom, right? If you can get that eel, if you can keep it in the strike zone for any period of time, no.
Okay. Interesting.
Would you ever throw a rubber core or an egg sinker in that case?
I did a little bit in Mauritius. I would do that. And I caught a few fish doing that. It just, at that point, I just go to a bucktail. The problem was if you were fishing in July, but by August, we really had almost nothing in Mauritius. But in July, you'd still have some bass in there on eels. And, but you just wouldn't get them on bucktails after, I don't want to say July 4th or something, but, well into July, so the bucktail really didn't work. That's probably the times I would go ahead and, add some weight. Yeah.
So we're getting closer to having to wrap this up for this time. And obviously we didn't get to half the stuff on the list, but I have to ask these questions. So I'm cutting in here, Toby, because these are questions now for me as a non-eel guy. If you had to try and beat the eel with something that was artificial, what would it be? And what would you do?
Now that Michael Jackson song is stuck in my head, so I have to get that out. I beat it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So beat the eel. I've never given this any thought.
Okay.
Although I picture this, I've got this little billy club in my garage in Greenport, and I don't know that anybody does that anymore, But I guess. I don't even know if that would. No, how would you even do that? I don't know. That's why I was saying, hey, if if you're on a good enough rock, then you're all set. But if you're waiting and it turns out though, if you're in deep enough waiting, then you're probably casting deep enough where it's not as big a problem.
I think you misunderstood my question. Let me ask it again.
Right.
Let me ask it again. If you had to outfish the eel, is what I mean, and with something artificial, so you have to use a plug or a bucktail or soft plastic, and you're like, this is my only chance at outfishing my buddy who's standing right here who's fishing eels, what would it be?
Well, it would be a hoagie or a sluggo kind of thing on a big swim bait hook, an owner beast, one of those big monster ones. That's one of the things. I had something that worked as well as the rig deal that I'm not allowed to talk about, but I had an artificial version. But you can't get these anymore. It was the big boy. It was the Uncle Josh sold these ridiculous pork rind strips. They call them the big boy, and they were like 9-inch, and they weighed like 3 ounces. And I swear I probably still have a couple jars of them. And I'll tell you what, I rigged those things like a rig deal, and they caught fish, and they were indestructible. The problem is after some time, you got to keep them in the brine and everything. So you got to, watch that the hooks don't get crappy. But all right. So let's be more realistic because you can't get that. Hoagies and sluggos. And of course, there are many these days. There are many things like hoagies and sluggos, even better. What do they call gravity eels or something? I mean, there's all kinds of tremendous artificial eels out there. So yeah, and that's way different than actually beating an eel. You're not outfishing an eel. You should have said, what would you use to outfish an eel?
Sorry, but we're definitely leaving that first part in because it's fantastic. So we're definitely going to leave that in. I'm not editing that out. It's great.
I'm picturing a billy club. What am I going to do with this thing?
Like, what the fuck is he talking about?
Yeah.
That's funny.
And if YouTube wouldn't restrict us, we'd throw "Beat It" in by Michael Jackson.
Yeah, exactly. But then we'd have to pull the video down. Yeah. That's funny. So one more question before we ask you our ending question that we're going to start trying to ask everybody. What about daytime and eels? Have to ask. Somebody's going to ask.
Oh yeah, no, they work. Okay. Well, put it this way, they work. No, they work. Period. And look. I'm not fishing them at noontime, but I'm talking about sunsets at 8 o'clock. I don't have any issues going down at 6:30 or something, 7 o'clock, and catching fish on eels. As long as you don't have a bluefish issue. But no, they 100%.
Cool.
They work. Yeah, in fact, I have on my YouTube channel, I have an eeling video, and it's funny because it shows how much confidence I have because you look in the mesh bag, it's like 12 eels in there, and and it was I jump up on a rock and boom, 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 and it's plenty of daylight. Yeah, absolutely 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I even remember those videos. I mean, I watched them all, but yeah, that's great. That's great. Toby, before I ask the ending question, was there anything else you wanted to get to specifically?
No, I think that covered a lot of the bits and pieces, and I wanted to get to a lot of the stuff since we had so many requests to cover eels, a lot of the stuff that was coming in from people as well. So I think we definitely nailed the vast majority of that.
Okay. All right, let me throw something in that you didn't ask about. You didn't ask about the leader.
Okay.
All right, 44 inches. I used Trilene Big Game Green. That was very good. The only time I was using fluoro was like on the jetty rocks because I had a perception that it held up better abrasion wise. Otherwise, 50-pound test Trilene Big Game Green.
How much do you love hearing that, Toby?
The fact that I've got like half a dozen spools of it here, perfect.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, I use it too.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's all I use for leader, yo.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So that's great. So we want to ask you a final question, then that's, what is something that you're really looking forward to in this coming season, 2025? We're just about there when we're recording this, in the surf. What's something you're like, I hope this happens, or I know it's going to happen, or, that kind of thing? What's something you're looking forward to?
Wow. I'm just not wired for that. I'm not. I'm gonna take it as it comes. I mean, it's because you can't anticipate what's going to happen. I hope in the spring, as soon as I get back, that I've got this one area where I do great bucktailing, and at that point it's like schoolies to, there's slots and stuff and a little better. I always look forward to that because it's the first good bass fishing of the season, catching, getting some action. Um, I so wish that my local North Fork, Long Island Sound plugging would jump back to life because I really enjoy that, but it's just been going downhill. So it's hard to look forward to something that you anticipate. You don't see a reason for it to be getting better. However, if it's going in that direction, I will be on those sand beaches up in the Hamptons a lot sooner than I was this year, because this year it was like, all right, I give up, I got to go over there. Well, this year I'm going to be, a little more proactive about doing that. So I guess I'm looking forward. Well, no, I guess I'm not looking forward to it, because the only reason I'm going to be doing it is because it's not going to be any good by me. So sorry. Well, it's hard. I mean, how can you look forward to something that you're not anticipating being good, right?
Well, let me ask you another question, because we asked this of Nick a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was a great question. So we'll pivot a little bit to our final question here. Is there?
I actually thought of one more I want to throw in.
Okay, great.
I want to circle back real quick on one eel after yours. Go.
Okay. Is there a bait, so something out there, that when you see it, you get really excited, or a bait that you're like, man, I really hope I see this at blank time of season? So, for example, I said mullet.
Adult bunker.
Okay.
Adult bunker.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because even if I'm not catching fish on those schools, in those schools, or anything, when they're around, good things are happening. And I'm not only thinking about the sound side of the North Fork, I'm thinking about the bay side of it in the spring. And I'm seeing the same thing there. We haven't had the bunker schools. I get good fishing on the bay side of the fork in the spring. But like last year, there were like hardly ever saw adult bunker. At the times when I had those fish, there were schools of adult bunker going through. So that's what gets me excited, because even if you're not catching on those schools, probably catching. Yeah.
Got it.
So this last question for me popped into my head. Something I might not even put on the list, but something I wanted to ask you. Once you've made you started your surf season for the year, whenever that may be, is it ever too early? And it doesn't necessarily match to the calendar because of people fishing different stretches. Is it ever too early to be fishing eels? Meaning, once you start fishing the surf for stripers on a given season, should you be eeling right out, or should you wait it out to a certain development in the season?
It's not too early. And it was amazing. It was one year. It was like May 16th, which by me on Long Island Sound, you're just, I lived in Wading River at the time. You've got some fish around. The fish start showing up around, I don't know, the 5th, the 10th. You start getting some fish that you can go down and plug. And then one night I went down. I brought eels. The first eel cast of the season, May 16th. I get a couple cranks in, thump, whoosh. 39 pounds. I don't know what that fish was doing there at that time, but and then I caught a couple more that night, but not that size, but 25, 28. So yeah, people would have been happy to catch a slot fish at that time, and there were cows there.
Yeah, that's like the largest fish I ever was next to being landed was over 55 pounds, and it was the second week of May, our first outing on a live eel.
There you go. Yeah, not surprised.
Great.
Yeah.
Great way to end it up. So thanks so much, John, for coming. I love that this is the beginning of a tradition. Have you back each time in April. There's so much more to talk about for sure, but thank you so much for coming again. This was amazing. Of course, it was awesome.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was fun. It's always fun. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We'll have in the show notes for everyone listening, links to all your books, all your information that way, so they can get everything that's still available. The five books you said at this point, correct? You working on another one? Anything else in the works?
No. You know what? You kind of empty the tank on things, at points, and yeah.
Yeah, well, you retired to another full-time job, which is the fishing stuff.
Fishing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so
Fishing
much,
for
John.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much, John. This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, at the Surfcast Podcast.